Hello and welcome to Sing Into Your Future, creating an accessible game for later today with Sean Bright, myself, Britt, and Arevya. So the overview of this talk is going to be a deep dive intro into a specific part of Lemonade Games Mystiques called the dioramas. Then we will launch into my segment, which will be the EasySurf backend perspective, where we get to look at like the UX teams stuff, the processes, and the organization of all the information. And then Arevya is going to talk about the process from the consultant's perspective, and then Sean's going to talk about the process from a developer's perspective. So hope you enjoy.
Hello everyone, how are we going? I know you can't answer me right now because I'm in Australia on a different day than you, but I'm going to ask it anyway. My name is Sean Bright. I'm a game designer from Australia. I'm a white male in my incredibly early 30s. I turned 30 last month, so I'm holding on to that with a vice-like grip. I've got dark hair and a beard. Basically, if you imagine a white guy with a beard, that's me. I'm wearing a green t-shirt at the moment that says "Take Care" on it because I want all of you to be taking care of yourselves, both at this conference and wherever you're watching from in the world. And yeah, like I said, I'm presenting from my home office in Australia, sunny old Melbourne. I'm currently working on Mystiques Haunted Antiques at our company Lemonade Games, which is what we're kind of going to be talking to you today about. The talk itself that we're doing with myself, Britt, and Arevya is called Sing Into Your Future, Developing an Accessible Game for Later Today. We're basically going to be covering how we've been working to implement a accessibility strategy from the beginning of development, which started about 2 years ago, to the end of the game, which is in the future. Who knows when? We'll see. So let's dive straight into it. Who am I? Like I said, my name is Sean. I've been working in the games industry for almost 10 years over here in Australia. I've worked across multiple companies on mobile, console, and PC games. So I've been a designer on Mystiques for about 2 years now. It was originally my sort of background that was the idea for it, antiquing. I did that before I was studying at uni for games. And I spoke to Ali, our director, every day for about a year while we were working together. And I just subtly mentioned that I used to do it, and she commented to that, and we sort of spanned this idea up 2 years ago, which is crazy now. So I've been working on it ever since. So that's me. But let's go into Mystiques. So Mystiques Haunted Antiques, what even is that? Mystiques is a game about the 3 worst women you've ever met running a failing antique store. And yes, it is haunted. You play as Gem, who's a Gemini. We didn't mean that. Gem came before the Gemini. We decided after the fact, but it works perfectly. We'll take it. Who has recently discovered her ability to commune with the dead, leading her to unravel stories and make some of that sweet, sweet cash. Mystiques is an adventure game that features detective mechanics to search through people's stuff and hunt for expensive antiques. As well as it also has decoration mechanics to make the shop and Gem look absolutely fabulous. So decoration and also like dressing mechanics too. You control Gem throughout the game on mouse and keyboard and controller at the moment. And so with Mystiques, it's a big game, and we've been working with EasySurf to implement accessibility through the dev cycle. From beginning to end is the ideal sort of situation. Instead of we're trying to avoid the classic trope of adding accessibility at the end of the game as sort of like a plugin, and that always sort of fails, I guess. In my eyes, it kind of does the worst of both worlds for the devs. For myself, I've done it a few times, had to plug it in right at the end, and it just sort of grinds up against all of the design decisions that you've made up until that point. So that's the sort of blocker. And for the disabled folks, like they get the worst of it because the systems that we implement aren't fully fleshed out, or they're just not great. So the idea to fix that we're trying to counteract is getting EasySurf, who we're working with, who Britt and Arevya work for, involved as early as possible in the design process. So getting them involved across every single system throughout the game, and finding out where in fact we could bolster it or tweak it a little bit to make it better for as a wider range of audience as we possibly can. And that's sort of where we're at the moment. We're about 6 months into, a little bit over 6 months into working with EasySurf, and so far it's been an absolute delight, and I'll go into that a bit later. At the moment, Mystiques, I should shout this out as well, is in sort of alpha. We're still prototyping. We've made a complete demo, a prototype, but we are currently looking for a publisher. So if you know any, hit me up. For this talk, I really want to focus in and hone our focus onto just one system. Just in the interest of time, we only got half an hour. So that system is the diorama system. So throughout the game, the player interacts with a whole heap of antiques by picking them up. When they're picked up, they're put into sort of a void view in front of them where they can manipulate and move them around and look for tiny little details that might, same as if you're like op shopping or something and you pick up a vase and you see like a watermark on the bottom or something like that. You can then find a brand and then know how expensive or cheap that thing would be. So we have the same sort of system here. Which is, like I say, you can click on these things called dioramas. And that's the system we're going to be talking about today, is the diorama system. And so the diorama system was sort of concocted to fix the old trope of pixel hunting in point-and-click games. So we knew that as a game, we were going to have like a lot of objects to cycle through, and the player would want to look at a lot of objects, which is like it's the core of the game. It's the detective element of the game. And so to fix the pixel hunting aspect of that, we developed this idea of a diorama. So the diorama is a collection of items within one big sort of object. Right now on the screen, there is a sort of sideboard, a side table with a record player on it, with speakers for the record player sitting on the top, a record next to the record player on display, and a pair of headphones on the sitting on the right-hand side of the record player. So this is an example of the diorama. So within this diorama, there are several different inspectable objects. So you can manipulate the diorama, you can turn it, you can pan it, you can zoom in on it, and you can look at all of these separate objects. And then when you click on those objects, you then go into the second GIF that's on the screen. In this GIF, we've clicked on the record player, and the record player sort of takes up the space that the diorama used to take up, and you can then zoom into the details on the record player. So it's like a diorama within a diorama almost, which is confusing. But that's sort of the system we're going to be talking about. To give a TLDR, it's the system that the players can use and interact with to see every item within the game. And it's, like I say, it's to fight against that pixel hunting element of point-and-click adventures. So there won't be everything in the world to inspect forever. It's going to be like isolated into a few different dioramas throughout a level. So as to I guess focus in players' energy on hunting within a small space instead of a large sprawling space that can feel a bit tiring and a bit boring even. Later on, I'll go over how we initially implemented the diorama system, and then how we've implemented EasySurf's feedback on the system throughout development. Instead of plugging the accessibility in at the back end of it, how we've sort of pitched this system to EasySurf, and we did several rounds of consulting, and we've tweaked it as we've built the game. So I'm going to hand over to Britt, who's going to talk to you more about what EasySurf's sort of role in this process is. Over to you, Britt.
Hi, my name is Britt Dye. I'm the Game Accessibility Lead at EasySurf. I'm a white woman in her mid-30s with curly brown hair wearing a black shirt. EasySurf is a disability-led accessibility consulting company that started in the web and now we're in games. We work with a variety of consultants with all kinds of disabilities. In the games division, we use focus groups, play tests, consulting sessions, and webinars to work with the developers and give them feedback on their games. While working with Lemonade Games Mystiques, we have done 2 rounds of focus groups so far, so that's going to be the main focus for my section of this talk. So during the first round, we had 3 focus groups that we filmed. The first one being blind and low vision players, then deaf and hard of hearing players, and then players with a variety of disabilities, everything from mobility to vision to cognitive disabilities. So after we film the focus groups, we take those videos, the UX team does, and we pick apart all of the nuggets of information, all of the barriers that our consultants came across or they couldn't play the game, so it was information about barriers they could conceive of happening during a playthrough. We put that into a spreadsheet, into a document where the developers could see those barriers broken down. Then we generated a report from that with high priority items, and we separated it into types of feedback and created a map for the developers. So what does that document look like? It's very important for us to organize it to make it easily digestible by the developers. You know, when you're in a focus group, sometimes it can be hard to remember everything, right? You're just like, the developers are talking, the consultants are throwing barriers at them, and it's just can be overwhelming in the moment. So we want to take that information, break it down, make it easily digestible, prioritize it, make it more easily implementable, actionable feedback for Lemonade games. How do we do that? We take the issue or the barrier that the consultant pointed out, which would be the barrier that's present within the games. So for example, an issue or barrier in this case in the dioramas would be the need to click and drag to move a diorama, to move it around. That would be the barrier. The impact would be then that the players who can't use a mouse or can't hold a button down wouldn't have access to that. They wouldn't be able to move the diorama, which means they wouldn't be able to play the game, which would make it a high priority item. So then we separate them by disability outcome. In this case would be movement, because that is the effect it has on the player. It has on the player's movement. The severity would be high, medium, low. In this case, high, because it would actually bar someone from being able to play the game. And then we separate it by experience impact. This is kind of unique in that we separate them on whether or not it's base understanding of the game, usability in the game, or enjoyment. Understanding would be, does a player have the base knowledge to be able to even start playing the game? Usability would be, can they use that knowledge to then interact with the game? And then enjoyment has an impact on the vision of the game, the experience, the enjoyment, what player experience the developer wants. The recommendations would be the recommendations the consultants give, or the recommendations that the UX team has for them as well. These are some of the process notes and feedback challenges we had as like the backend team working with the developers and the consultants. As I said before, during the first round, the game wasn't playable. It was a prototype, so there were some communication barriers with explaining how things are going to work, what the vision for the experience was, getting to the core of that so we could really drill down into the barriers present in the game. During the second round, Sean played a prototype. The players then got to see how the game was going to work, and he could explain that. This was EasySurf's first project, so we had to learn and then teach the feedback process. So I had to create the documentation, how it was going to be organized, and then teach that to others on the team so that way we could all work together and the consultants would know what we were looking for and things like that, so we could more seamlessly put everything together. By getting our process like streamlined and everything, we were then able to talk to the consultants about what kind of feedback we were giving the developers, so that way they could have that in mind when they were working with the devs. Another issue we ran into was the facilitation process during the focus groups. Sometimes, during focus groups, people can get quiet or they just don't understand what it is the dev's trying to convey. Especially during the prototype focus group, there had to be some bridging to sort of be like, well, what was the intended experience of this, and is there any part of this, that would affect players who are deaf and hard of hearing, or is there any information only conveyed by audio, or Is there information only conveyed visually? Those types of things just took some facilitation, some practice, and then we started to get the hang of it. Those were some of the main challenges that the UX team came across. And now I will pass it to Arevya, who's going to tell you the consultant's perspective.
Hi there, my name is Elizabeth, or Arevya if you want to use my gamer tag, and I'm a disabled and chronically ill content creator, accessibility consultant, and public speaker from Norway. I'm a white woman in my 30s with bright red hair, wearing pink clothing, sitting in my gaming room. Today, I will take you all through how I do my work as a game accessibility consultant on projects like Mystiques. So let's start on the top with my goals. Whenever I work on a game like Mystique or any other game, it's my goal to 1. Make my own barriers and disability not seem so scary and aloof, and make it make sense in the context of the game I'm working on, and 2. Make the devs understand how to be comfortable in their own game's possibility and limitation when it comes to accessibility. For the first point, I have a bunch of disabilities and chronic illnesses that affect my day-to-day life in different ways, but what mostly affects me the way I interact with games is my cerebral palsy, rheumatism, arthritis, and PTSD. Due to this, the most common barriers I meet in any game can be helped by either adding motor accessibility and/or cognitive mental health accessibility. So, when I consult on any game, motor and cognitive accessibility are my main focuses, but I will also let developers know if I see any other barriers that is obvious to me. It's also important to me to not only point out something that is a barrier, but also try to explain why it is a barrier. So when developers try and solve the problem, there is a bigger chance for them to make a solution that will reduce the barrier properly. My second goal when doing game accessibility consulting is to make the devs understand possibilities and limitations when it comes to their own game. Game accessibility is a brilliant way for any developers to show their vision of the game to as many people as possible. But it is important for me to make them understand that no game can be 0% accessible and no game can be 100% accessible. But that's important for them to find a good middle way. So in the talk of everything they can add in the game they have made or are in the process of making, I also want to be realistic about the fact that sometimes it is okay to not add something if it goes against the core values of your game. But then understand that it will exclude some gamers. Here it is important to follow what the devs have set as their pillars, values, or core experience they want their gamers to have, and be honest about how adding design, ideas, and options can make their game more accessible, but it can also make it more inaccessible for others. But in the end, all I can bring is my own knowledge and expertise, and even though I of course wish for all the accessibility to be added, realistically I understand that games does not live in a vacuum and things happen. Be that budget, time, or decision, not everything will always be implemented. All I can hope for in the end is that my words have made an impact, and that the people I've worked with now have a greater understanding of the importance of game accessibility. So, how is the process of working as a game consultant? When I work on a game, I either do a playtest of the game alone or together with the devs, or I do a more in-depth discussion about specific ideas or part of the games together with the developers. This means that I sometimes consult on games even before it's an actual game to test, which is sort of what I did when it comes to Mystiques. I was part of both sessions that we talked about earlier, and as said, we did not play the game ourselves, but we talked about concepts and ideas and would show specific gameplay from the game. And there are benefits for having consultant on this early in a project, even though there are no game for us to play, and that is because we can help make sure that the developer can incorporate useful accessibility into the design of the game, but also into early budgeting. When it comes to the diorama, we had a longer talk about my need for cognitive accessibility, and more specific, my need for information, so that I don't get overwhelmed and miss points due to how intricate the diorama system can be. We also talked about motor accessibility. I pointed out that it looks like you need to move your hand quite a lot to turn the diorama around with a mouse, and sadly, having to use quite large repetitive motions with my hands could quickly become tiring and cause pain over a long period of time. I recommended to add both sensitivity options so that I could move large portion of the diorama with less movement, and also to add different controller options so that you could use the D-pad and keyboard for the same movement. I could also benefit from having the option where making the rotation animation more static, so it automatically snaps to a new side with a push of a button. I also pointed out that it would be easier for me to play the game when I had fewer button inputs while playing, as my setup where I play with my feet has less button than a regular controller. This could not only benefit me, but it could also benefit others that have specialized gaming setup with limited input possibilities, either because of their system or because they can't use, for example, an arm. And it is important to remember that consultation like this is not just me saying what I need, but a two-way conversation where the developers also can talk about how they will solve any barriers and to ask questions. You can sort of look at it as a sparring session, which is also why I'm such a fan of getting to talk to the team early on, so that it minimizes the backtracking that is necessary to make the game more accessible. And when I am done with my consultation, all of the work, discussion, and conversation are often wrapped up in a report with a bow on the top, and that is the devs can take with them into the future of development of their game. And when I work with EasySurf, they do that part for me, which means less paperwork for me, which is a win-win. So what was the biggest challenges of working on this project? The ironic part is that often with game accessibility is that the biggest advantages of having a diverse group working together on a project can also be the biggest challenges for us. When you speak to a big group of us, it can almost be a bit scary because you start understanding how vast the field of game accessibility actually is. We often say that no two disabled people are alike, and it is true. Even though many of us have similar disability and chronic illnesses, they might affect us differently, and also how we work around it might differ. Like, I have met people with arthritis that could never in a million years use feet controllers like I do, because their illness affects their feet more than their hands. So when you are in a big group with many people, it can sometimes be a challenge to get your point across to make sure that it's understood that even though you have similar barriers as somebody else in the group, you might not face it the same way or need the same level of support with that barrier. This is why I think it is important to put everything you get out of a session like this into a document, so that you get some sort of system in all of the info you are presented with, and it also gives the consultant a possibility to go over any misunderstandings. But what have I learned from this project? When it comes to the work on Mystiques, I think that one of the best learning moments for me has been the privilege of joining this early in development of a game. Sadly, the norm I have seen over the past years is that accessibility consultants is often contacted more to the end of a game development when it's already something to play and almost a finished game. Yes, of course, it is fun for me to be able to test an almost done game before anybody else, but it is also drastically lower the possibility of what can be added when it comes to game accessibility. It is important to remember that even though game barriers can be reduced by adding options, this is not a be-all end-all solution of a lot of barriers. Often we see that games accessibility can also, and often better, be implemented through good game design, but for that to be possible, you typically need to start working on accessibility early in the process, which can be seen in Mystiques. But don't be discouraged from still doing your best even though you haven't added any accessibility yet. As they say, the best time for you to add accessibility was when you started, and the second best time for you to add accessibility is today. And that is how I work as a game accessibility consultant. I hope you learned something.
Thanks, Arevya and Britt. Yeah, I'm back again to talk to you about the consultation phases between Lemonade Games and EasySurf, and what that sort of looked like. So like I think I said at the start there, about 6 months ago, we got in contact with Lemonade Games. I can't remember who shot the first message, but either way. And that first sort of consultation session block sort of went over 3 or 4 weeks with several different meetings, I guess, with the whole of the EasySurf team. So each sort of session was based around different sort of disabilities, so we could get all the sort of feedback from each disability into the one session instead of sort of scattering our brain and trying to cover all of the different bases. That first session was to get the whole EasySurf team around Mystiques and to figure out what it was. And then we got a whole bunch of feedback for the whole game, which I'm not going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about solely the diorama system. So like I said, the first consultation had several different sessions with multiple experts. And yeah, we got a bunch of different feedback on the whole game. EasySurf went away and did all of this by themselves. We just had the sessions and they went away and worked behind the scenes and delivered us as a studio, which is so helpful. Different graphs, Word documents and Miro boards with all the feedback broken down and ranked from lowest to highest hitting and highest priorities and lowest priorities and all that sort of stuff, which is incredibly helpful. So the main feedback that we got from that first session was unable to see the dioramas. So literally, if someone is blind, they cannot see the diorama at all, which may sound super obvious, but if you can see, you don't think about that. And I know that I didn't. There was also no feedback on the points of interest within the dioramas. So like I said before, like if you're inspecting an object, there's a point of interest on it. Maybe it's the brand mark or something like that on a vase. There's no feedback whatsoever except vision on that system. And at the time of the first consult as well, it was bound to mouse and keyboard, which is super limiting, obviously. So after that first consultation, we went away as a studio and we had a look at what we can do to change up and fix some of those issues. This all being said, there was no pressure from EasySurf at all to implement anything. We just wanted to try and make it as best as we could. So after that, we added a vibe check, which is a system where you can press the spacebar at any given time during the game, and a little UI pop-up will show up where there is either an inspectable, a antique within a diorama. There are dioramas in the level, or points of interest on an inspectable. So it's just a little hint system. We also added rotating and zooming functionality so that players could, if they were vision impaired and couldn't quite see super well, the ability to zoom all the way in onto an antique, so you can find those details a little bit easier as well. And we also went through and added basically, I'd say full, but pretty close to full controller support for the whole game. So you can almost control the whole game with just an Xbox controller now, which is super. Yeah, that's unlocks so much potential. For the second round of consults, we got a whole bunch of feedback. I won't go through all of them today. It's probably 30 or more points of feedback. Again, no pressure from EasySurf to implement any of it. That's up to us as game designers. Ideally, we add all of it, but that's how it goes. So I just highlighted the top sort of 3 here that came through that were actionable pretty quickly. One of them definitely isn't, but it's one that we feel passionate about and want to try and hit. So the first was adding controller support for the UI. Like I said, we added 99.9% of controller support, but the UI still isn't navigatable. So that was one big one. Dyslexic friendly fonts. We had a lot of font in there that was very pretty, but not ideal for dyslexic folks. And the number 3 one, which is a big one and that we really want to get in as soon as possible, but also is quite difficult. Audio descriptors for all of the items and all of the dioramas and basically the game of telling folks where they are at any given point. So they're the biggest 3. Like I said, we had heaps and heaps of feedback, and it was not overwhelming, but it was such an awesome thing for EasySurf to give it to us. And so to finish up the talk, I really want to go through some questions that you might have working with EasySurf as a company, and how it worked with us and our sort of pipeline. And so I've just got a couple of questions here that I'll answer for you. I'm hoping that these are the questions that you were thinking of, and I'm hoping I've done a good enough job of praising EasySurf as to how good they have been to work with. I can't praise them enough, basically. So the first question here is, did the feedback impact our vision of the game? And it absolutely didn't. That is because of how we've structured the pipeline. Instead of, like we said, applying the feedback at the end of the dev cycle, we're putting it right in the middle of it. So therefore, the vision isn't impacted whatsoever. It sort of evolves with the feedback. And I know some people are pretty precious with their ideas, but like, if you can, like, why wouldn't you get as many people to play the game as possible is my sort of view on it. Like, why wouldn't you try and aim for as many hands on your game as possible, if that makes sense? How did Lemonade decide what to implement? That was pretty easy. So like I said before, EasySurf goes away and does a lot of the data crunching for us, and then we'll just give us back a report and be like, these are the heaviest hitting sort of X amount of features that you could make and could implement, and they will hit the most, the biggest variety of people, and they will sort of carry the game a bit more, as well as be more of a generalist vibe, or if you want to be super specific into one disability, you can do that. It's all in that report. It's so helpful. The next question is, how much of an impact was it to work with people with disabilities? And this one I don't think can be understated enough. I've said this a few times to the EasySurf team, but it's a very selfish relationship that I feel, just for me, because I get so much more out of working with these people than they get out of me, I would say. It's inspiring. It's also just super interesting to see the world and the games from their perspective. We've worked with people who can't see or can't hear very well, and all this sort of stuff, and it just opens my mind to games and how they sort of are super limiting, I guess, to a lot of people, and it really forces me to be a better designer, I think, as well as an absolute pleasure to work with these people who are just grateful to have this opportunity. And it goes both ways. I'm super grateful to have this opportunity to work with these people as well. So like I say, it's a selfish thing from me. And the last sort of question was it helpful to work with disabled gaming experts? So yeah, I don't know if we might have said this earlier on in the talk, but a lot of the people who work for EasySurf are also avid gamers and streamers as well. So working within the sort of the game space in that way as well. And it's just like we could, get people who are experts on disabilities but aren't super gamers, and so their feedback wouldn't be, I guess, as ideal, as well as like being like, experts. They know what we're looking for, and we can tell them like what's not working and what is working. If we just got a whole group of like, disabled gamers who may just be gamers, which I think that has a complete, like it has its own space within this pipeline, but it's definitely not in the pre-alpha stage. Because we're working with experts, we can tell them, hey, this isn't working yet. This is a whip. What do you think of this? Like we can pitch ideas and bounce them off each other. Whereas if we were not speaking to experts, they might be like, no, make it this now. So that's why it was super helpful to work with those experts, those gaming experts, especially, because you can sort of get away with that and also, bounce off ideas from each other. And yeah, that's the sort of talk. I really hope that people got something out of it. And if you didn't, please hit me or Britt or Arevya up on Twitter. We'll put our stuff at the end here. And I'm happy to talk, like I say, I'm happy to talk about accessibility, about Mystiques, about games, till the cows come home. I'm super passionate about it and I love it. And I really want to thank the GAconf for putting this on and allowing me the time to talk some dribble at you. So I really appreciate it, and have a good day. Thank you very much.
In memory of Brandon and Milan, who brought an irreplaceable perspective to this project.